Hey guys, welcome to the next episode on Trance Takeover. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the sub. Now, the sub, it's just as equally important as the kick drum in uplifting trance, as it's pretty much the driving force of your entire track. But before we look into that, we're going to be looking at the chord progression. So I've got the main lead partly set out here. This is part of the main lead that we're going to be looking at later on, but you would have recognized it from the kind of the demo, the playthrough that we looked at. So we are going to be working in the key of G sharp or A flat, so it's G sharp major. However, over here you might notice that we actually have the key of C minor playing. And the reason that I've got this set up in this way is because I want the start of the track to be in C minor, and then we're going to drop down to the G sharp major. Now the reason we're doing this is because I don't really like working in major keys in trance. I find they become very kind of floaty and uplifting. They don't have that kind of dark, moody atmosphere that you want for the kind of the vibe of 138. Now, this lead is perfectly fine itself. It works really nicely in G sharp major. However, if I were to use the whole track, the start of the track in G sharp major, like I say, I find it limits myself to what I can kind of create creatively, because I don't have it almost dictates you having that very kind of floaty, uplifting feeling. Whereas when you work in a minor key, you can create your own atmosphere and you can get away with doing a lot more different things. It really kind of gives you a bit more leeway to be creative in that sense. So let's just very quickly listen to the start of it. So this is going to be what we're going to be playing in the breakdown. So that's in the major key. Now over here we have it in the minor key. And you can hear, as we went from C minor, there was a real nice step down to the G sharp major. So this is going to be the intro, and then we're going to go into the break for this section here. So how do we kind of work this out? Well, usually when you have a key in a minor key and you want to drop down to a kind of relevant major key, we can just do a very easy trick of transposing this by 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we've changed it down to generally the relevant kind of major key. This might not always work depending on the notes you've got at the top, but with these very simple notes, it's working very nicely. And we can even see within the original chord progression, we've got our C chords down here. The third note of C minor is E flat, which is this note here. And so we can see we've got an E flat from the chord of C minor playing in the G sharp major chord. So that gives us a good kind of indication that we can change from the G, from the C minor down to the G major, G sharp major, and back again. A little bit complicated. It's not really what this course is about. It's not really about the theory. We really just want to show you the kind of techniques and how to get going and how to remix a track. But this is one nice way, and I've done this in a lot of my tracks when I found that I'm remixing an uplifting track which is in the key in a major key, and then I've worked out how to change it to a minor key to allow me to have that additional freedom and creativity in the intro. So with that being said and out of the way, let's now have a look. So that's the reason that I wanted to show you that, is because we're going to be working in C, not in G sharp. So we're going to be doing a rolling sub. I've got the sub linked to my sub channel here, and we've got some EQs set up which we'll go through in a bit. There's nothing on them at the moment except for just a very standard 30 Hz low cut. So let's go into our piano roll. Now it's already on C, and let's add in our 3 16th notes, and we're going to bring down the first one. So remember what we were looking at last episode in the kick drum? We had the 4 16th notes, and the 3rd and 4th is where we reduced the tail. That's the reason why we want to allow these two notes to come through nicely, and this note is being reduced in volume just very slightly because that's when the kick drum is going to be playing. So we're crafting their own different space for these two sounds to be playing at the same time. So this is what a lot of people say. Does your kick and your sub need to be in the same key? No, not necessarily. You just need to make sure that your kick and your sub have enough room so they both don't play at the same time or as little as possible, and they have enough room for them both to kind of come through with as much definition as possible. So I'm just going to then copy these over. So now we've got our 1 bar. And let's open up our synth. So we're going to be using 3 Oscillator by FL Studio. Really simple, but really, really nice. I'm using this for the sub because I just find it has these very, very nice sub frequencies. And I'm going to start, and I'm not going to be using sine waves. I find that using sine waves creates too much of a kind of just pure sound with a sub. Maybe good for, say, example, drum and bass, or if you're using it as just a pad, kind of like a low end of a pad. For the sub bass itself, we're going to be using a square and a sawtooth, and we're not going to be using the third. So let's just turn that down altogether. So let's just have a quick listen. Doesn't sound anything like a sub at the moment. So let's knock that down a couple of octaves. That's starting to get there. Let's go into the rapper settings and let's go to our ADSR and let's put all of them down. Then the sustain all the way up. Now that means that we can control the length of the notes simply by using the MIDI. And we want to shorten these just very slightly. We don't want them to overlap at all. About there sounds good. Then let's go to our filter and let's add on the SVF LP times 2 filter and let's pull down. And now we have a nice sounding sub. Really easy, super simple, but works perfectly. So the problem with C is it's not a great key to work in. I really don't like it. I always try and avoid it at all costs. Anything between B and E flat I kind of stay away from. The reason for that is I find that the sub can become very hard to EQ properly, to fit with the kick drum and to have enough power and to make sure that it doesn't sound too high or too low. So if I knock this down an octave, very low, put it back up, and it sounds quite high. Unfortunately, we're going to have to go with a high one. The low one I find just doesn't have that definition within the mix, but we can kind of control the high one to create that definition. So let's go ahead and we're going to open up Span. This is a great plugin. If you've watched any of my courses before, you'll know that I use this quite a lot. It's fantastic for looking at specific frequencies and making decisions based on what we see and what we hear. I must have a caveat at the very beginning here. Span is a great tool for referencing. It's not something that should be the definitive answer. Your ears are the definitive answer of everything. This is here to help you understand exactly what frequencies are where, and we use it as a reference point. But the final answer always comes with our ears, because Span can sometimes show you frequencies that may not sound the same way in your ears. It can be a little misleading at times, so we're using it as reference only. Let's change it to high res, and I'm just going to turn the volume down, and let's have a look at the frequencies that this plays. So as we can see, we've got our lower C note at around 65 Hertz. We've got our middle octave at around 130. We've got a G frequency in here about 197, and then our third C octave around 258, 260, and a couple of rogue frequencies here. So what we want to do is we want to control these two frequencies here. Now, I generally call this lower one the weight, this higher one the definition, and we want to get a nice balance between the two. Unfortunately, the key of C is going to be a bit tricky, but within other keys it can be a lot easier. So this technique can be used for all of the different keys. However, you have to change it track by track, key by tree. This is why I'm saying you need to use your ears to kind of to give the final answer of how it sits within the mix. So let's go ahead and open up our EQ, and I'll just line these up nicely. So first thing we want to do is we want to set up our EQ points. So we got the lower key of C here. So if we right click on our node, we go to C, and we want to go to C2, which is exactly 65.4 Hertz. And then we want to do the same for the next octave up, which is 130.8. And then let's change these bell curves to be very small. And then we're just going to listen, and we're going to bring up the bell curves on each frequency to enhance or retract. And we can only do this by kind of listening. So let's add a little bit more sub. I think now we need to take away some of that high ends, the 130 frequency. It's very, very strong. And as we can hear now, we're allowing this kind of weighted sound to come through more. The definition, we've lost a little bit, but it's still in there. Now we can see that we've kind of switched over the peaks of these frequencies. Now, again, this changes key by key. If you're working, say, for example, in the key of A, your second frequency, which would be about 65 hertz or so. No, sorry, about but between, I think it's 180. Let's just quickly have a look at that. It will be, just so we get it right, 55, sorry, and 110. So our 110 frequency would be the more kind of prominent one, and the 65 kind of area would be a lot lower. So with the key of C, we want the weights to be around the kind of the more kind of prominent, because this high end is really kind of too much. So that's sounding a little bit nicer. So now let's go ahead and remove that G frequency. So I'm just going to play it again. And let's have a look, find that G. So it was around 197. So we've got 197. And now let's pull that out. So that's sounding a little bit nicer, just getting rid of that resonant frequency. There's not too much of it in the key of C. In other keys, there might be a very harsh resonant frequency there, and you'll notice when you pull it out, it allows this low ends to come through nicely. The same way that we looked at on the kick drum when we were talking about removing this mid-range frequency to allow these bottom end frequencies and top end frequencies to come through more. This is exactly the same as what we're doing here. We're removing this resonant frequency, which is allowing those two frequencies below it to come through more. So let's go ahead and add on some high cut, because it still sounds a little bit too high to me. And we'll add a second high cut. And that's sounding a little bit nicer. So now let's go ahead and get this in with the kick drum. So what we've just done now, this can change, and it probably will change as the track goes on. We are doing this within solo, but we need to now merge it with the rest of the, with the kick drum. And then as the track goes on, we may find ourselves changing it slightly, or the volumes. So let's get the kick drum in. And first of all, what we're going to do with the kick, we're going to level this down to -12 dB on our output here. So the reason I'm putting it at -12 is because I know generally when it comes to a full track, you'll be around the -6 dB area, peaking between -9 and -6, and that's perfect for mastering. So that's just simply the reason I'm putting it at -12. Also gives us plenty of headroom to play with. So let's go ahead and we'll just start bringing up the volume of the sub. And I'm going to keep the high res and the span open, and we're going to bring up the kick till we hear that it fits nicely within the sub of the kick area. So that's sounding quite nice, and we can physically see on the high res there, we can see our sub low frequency, our sub high frequency, and we can see the kick drum. And generally speaking, we want to have our sub maybe just slightly lower than the kick drum. This way we can ensure that when the sub kind of changes key, we're not going to be going too far up and down in volume. We'll come back to that later. But we want to make sure that our sub is not pushing above the kick drum. Again, this will change by key. Sometimes you might find that the sub will push its way over, but with your ears, it might sound perfect. So with this one, it looks right and it sounds right as well, which is the most important thing. So that's sounding good to me. There's not really too much we can do right now, as like I said, it's more of a work in progress where we might come back to this, especially once we get once we get the bass in. We want to then kind of gel this all together, and in order to do that, we need to keep tweaking as we're working and working on the fly, as you would. So we'll look at that next episode, the bass, and then the kick and the bass, putting it all together, gelling it before we head on with the rest of the track. I'll see you then. Bye bye.